vision of an equitable future for everyone. And we see ourselves as catalysts and collaborators in that mahi. So some of you may have seen the last week's session. The last week looked at an introduction to the healthcare home model of care and where it came from, what learnings and experiences general practice has had over the last 10 years in Aotearoa. And today we're going to be doing a slightly deeper look at proactive care, specifically as one of the domains of the overall model of care. And we'll be looking at some of the challenges in general practice post-COVID, which we started to talk about last week, and sort of setting that in a context of what might really good general practice and good wellness and healthcare delivery look like. And we'll be talking about some specifics relative to that. So I'm just going to introduce the actual model of care itself again, or remind us, and then let Carol lead the next part of the presentation. But just to kind of reorientate ourselves back to the 4 domains, which are really just a helpful way of dividing up different components of the general practice offer to the community. And some of what we know, and much of this is informed by lean access processes, also taking digital platforms into account, is that if we have a systematic, well thought through, based on data and analysis around access and demand, if we have a systematic process which includes being able to resolve needs on the phone, then we'll be able to offer a good same-day service. But also enable other members of the workforce to lean into proactive and preventative care. And so really having an unplanned care, well-managed process is a part of making it possible for the wider workforce in general practice to then do proactive and preventative care, as opposed to just being driven by what's coming through the door every single day in a kind of treadmill fashion. So we'll be looking at mainly the domain on the right, although routine and preventative care, particularly if one overlays a well-being or early intervention lens on that, the two are quite closely linked. I am just going to check with Carol if there's anything more you want me to say. Oh, no, there is one more thing to be said about this framework, which is a kind of core part of the model of care and also collaborative Aotearoa's philosophy, and that is to put equity at the center of that framework. And we do that in order to build in equity, such as data analysis, but also working with whānau and or looking at impacts of improvement. So sometimes it can be the impact of a digital improvement on different groups. We do it quite consciously, and it's built into the data and how we use improvement to drive what's better for whānau. So that's a really important part of the model. At this stage, I'm going to hand over to Carol. And Carol, I'll just keep driving the slides, but I'll let you take over the narrative from here. Carol, we can't hear you.
My apologies. I will start that again. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Carol Coyne tuku ingoa. It's a privilege to be here today presenting this. Today we're going to look at a very practical implementation of...
I'm sorry, Carol, to interrupt. Can I just check, can everybody see a presentation at the moment, or are you not seeing a presentation? No, I was about to say, I don't think you are you? One moment. This is why it's feeling a little bit weird. Hang on, that's Wānanga session 1. I beg your pardon. That's a stop share. I'll give you Wānanga session 2. Sorry, guys. Just one moment. So let's get this sorted.
I have that up if you would prefer.
I've got it.
Okay. So
we're here. Everybody okay with that?
Great.
Yes, jolly good.
as I was saying recently, I have come out of general practice in a healthcare home model of care. And so I'm today going to be looking at some of the practical elements of what it looks like on the ground. And it's, yeah, so over the last few weeks, we've been hearing about what the challenges are in general practice, and this would be nationwide. I think we're experiencing system capacity and overload within our workforce, a lack of GPs and nurses, having to bring in locums and remote GPs, which can be a challenge for the continuity of care for our clients. There's a growing demand and complexity. We're seeing more acute patients coming into primary care because of the overload in acute care. Things that we weren't seeing before, we are now seeing in primary care, which is growing the demand and the complexity. Just a wee example of that, we were having patients coming in, booked in for a 15-minute appointment for suture removal, and in actual fact, it had been a cabbage or a massive operation that would take an hour to remove sutures and staples. So they were coming more into primary care, not going back to acute care where they were done. So those are some of the things that are increasing challenges in general practice. Burns were coming in as well, which we weren't, that we're not necessarily equipped to deal with. The other thing is a fatigue and exhaustion from capacity issues. There's also been very much an increased COVID demand. Still now, there's still an increased demand on general practice. We're having system changes, which can be a challenge in general practice. There's growing complexity and need, growing equity gaps and outcomes. So now there's a lot more demand on general practice to meet those equity needs and those complex conditions and getting those outcomes. We're finding a lot of the staff have got fatigue over the last 2 years and continuing. There's also been some confusion regarding the future and the New Zealand health reforms. So these are some challenges that we've had come up in general practice. And I'm sure there's lots more, but these are just some of the ones that have come up. And so we were looking at like where to from here. So Mel, if you can go to the next slide. This is a really good tool to look at within your team, and it's what does good look like? And it's a really good tool to use in your own groups and your own teams, because although we're in this time of great change, and we're still wanting to deliver good care and to be able to be healthy in our workplace environment. So some of the things that we've looked at, so if we start from a workforce perspective, and you may have others you would add into it, these are just some tastes of what would look good for the workforce. That we have enough time in the day to do all our tasks. I think, we can feel extremely overwhelmed by the end of the day when your inboxes are as full as they were at the beginning of the day. That we can go home on time. That we're working at the top of our scope, because that's very satisfying. We get job satisfaction within that. That we feel supported and part of a team. That as staff members, we feel respected and valued. That we feel like we're using our time effectively and efficiently. And we like to know that we're doing our best for our patients, our whānau, and our community. So that's, what would look good. What does good look like for us as on the floor staff members? From a patient perspective, they need, they would like to feel valued and cared for, to feel like they're being treated by the whole person, that their family and community needs are taken into account, that they can choose where and when to consult with their GP practice, that they can access primary care easily, that they have the choice to use technology, to use portals to make appointments, to look at their records, and to order repeat prescriptions, and that be an easy process for them. There are different appointment lengths to suit their needs, or different people to see to suit their needs. And that's where we look at our multidisciplinary team, where we've got our social workers, our hip and health coaches. It might be that we need to go and see a nurse and have that extra time that we wouldn't see necessarily with our GP. Even now we can have appointments with our pharmacists. So it's to have that right person at that right time. That I can see the same health professional and team regularly. That one, there's quite a big challenge in our changing workforce environment. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And that they're able to contribute to their plan of care, what that looks like for them, and to be very much involved in their own health care plan and their healthcare outcomes. The other thing is, as a patient, they need to feel heard. So this is what good looks like. From a business or a system perspective, that the business is sustainable and profitable. As we know, if it's not, we don't get paid. We need to be sustainable and profitable. That the business can invest into the workforce. That the business works closely with the consumers, the people, the whānau, to improve the quality of care. That the business improvement is bedded in our workforce culture. Everybody can make things better every day. And most importantly, that we love to work here. So that's what good looks like. Thanks, Mel.
Hey, Carol, I just wanted to add, and thank you for that, yeah, next week we talk a little bit more about lean as an improvement methodology. And this is an exercise that we often use in the context of lean. And it's helpful to understand that when we're looking at improvement, sometimes there is a tension between who we're benefiting. So we might make something easier for ourselves, but it might not be easier for the people we're serving. And if we think about it in terms of who is this good for, or what is this, who is this benefiting, it just helps us be more conscious about making those kind of decisions, or looking at the balance of value for who. And I would give an example. Clinical triage for same-day requests in the healthcare home model of care. We know that between 40 and 60% of those calls are resolved on the phone. We know it through data across the country. And so why would you ask those people to drive in? Yeah, who's it good for? And it is actually good for the business and for the workforce as well. So it's obviously very helpful if a process improvement is beneficial for everyone. So I was just going to add that to the what does good look like. And I think there's a further thing to be said here, and that is that when in the context of improvement and in the context of all the challenges that primary general practice and indeed NGOs find themselves in now, it's easy to spend a lot of our time looking at what's wrong. And that is part of lean, if finding waste and identifying problems and solving them, but it can be hard work if every day is difficult too. And so there's a real benefit to be had to consider, some of this is also to do with taking the steering wheel. If general practice is really challenging, what's our plan and where are we going? And it's really helpful as a workforce to do literally Post-it note and, write up as a team, what do you think? And work with your community. What do you think? What is good for you? If we think, lots of video consults is good, is that good? How do we make it good? Considering improvement and excellence and driving a kind of positivity culture. Almost Jazz would love it. I know she would. I'll let you go on, Carol.
It's lovely. These are just some things that we would like to talk about today. Building blocks for improvement. daily huddles, I will go into that at greater length next. Weekly meetings, these are really important to touch base, to create change, and to stay in touch. Change teams, that we use structured problem solving in small groups. We identify the errors, what problem we are solving, and to support an improvement culture, and to unite over a common purpose or value. And as Mel was saying, this is a really good illustration of how we make these things happen. And together we work as a team, because if we're all on board, then things are going to get done, and we're going to get that consistency of good practice coming through. Thanks, Mel. If you can just go to the next slide.
I'm just going to say a couple of things also about this one, if that's okay. And I know you sort of start developing this theme. So some of these building blocks are lean building blocks. And I think the point to be made is that if we don't build the time for these things into our general practice standardized template, because general practice is actually quite a structured service offer, and how we schedule our people is quite structured, in order to do these things, which we know drive improvement, they have to be built in. And Carol will spend more time on the huddle, but the huddle is a great example. It obviously needs to be in everybody's template, but more importantly, it needs to deliver value to those people. Weekly meetings, kind of traditional general practice might have had clinical meetings or even GP meetings and nurse meetings and then other people meetings. It makes more sense, particularly in a proactive care scenario, to be bringing multiple comprehensive teams together. And it obviously depends on what the meeting's for, whether it's for patient care or for improvement, and building in change team meetings, which Carol will also work through, and indeed problem solving. So having a board, and I will talk again more about this next week, and a board could either be a visual board in practice. Renee has one lovely one behind her, or it could be on Microsoft Teams, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But knowing how to identify problems, how to prioritize them, how to solve them without involving a long meeting on a Saturday night, so these things have to be also easy and quick to do all the time. And it's why we use the language everybody, everywhere, every day. They get built in on a small incremental basis. It's not a special meeting, which general practice would find hard to do. And consistent improvement, particularly empowering everybody everywhere, is much more effective by building in those building blocks. And that's really why we also use the language building blocks to continue to make things better.
That's lovely. Okay, so I really want to talk about daily huddles and the importance of these daily huddles in general practice. I've put a couple of bullet points up here that we connect with our team, and open templates, chance to pass on important information, and it's not a time for system or process changes. So we can just take that slide down for a bit there, Mel, while I talk about the huddles. Okay, so the power of daily huddles. When patient flow is constantly changing, when staff is constantly changing, and new emergencies occur every day, we need to huddle at the same time with the same agenda to bring the team together, anticipate issues, and consider patient needs. So ideally this would be at 8:30 on every morning, so that everybody is aware that it's on their template. We all get together and huddle. This is an opportunity to connect with your team, whanaungatanga, to check in with each other. We are a team, we do have lives, and lives happen, and it's that time that we can just, are you okay? Is everything all good? We're here today. One of the things Mel just said is that it's really important to celebrate what we are doing right, and in that time it's really great. It can be on your board as a visual, you know, this is what we've achieved, somebody's doing an amazing job, look at the incredible feedback that we've had this week. Doesn't have to be every day, but it is a great opportunity to set the tone for the day, and to encourage your team, who's ever leading that group, to encourage the team. We've got this, you know, a little bit like a pre-game pep talk, because, you know, we're all going to go and hit the ground running. And if we've checked in and made sure everyone's okay, that is one of the benefits of a huddle. Normally we'd run them for about 30 minutes. So that's one of the important things, is to connect with the team. The other thing that's really important is that it's a chance to open the templates and to look at what triage is doing. Like, we may come in on a Monday morning and triage is out the gate. So we can realistically look at what our day is going to be and anticipate the issues that are going to arise. Ideally, it would be someone like your nurse lead, who would have previously, prior to the meeting, opened all the templates, because they're the ones that are going to get the staff changes, the absences, and they would have gone through and made those necessary changes, and, you know, like, shared the workload through the team. So that's, and the other thing that gives them an opportunity to do is to look at where human error has occurred. For example, someone may have booked a cervical smear screening on a practice care assistance template, and so those are those times that we can fix those things. Someone may have booked surgery with a GP in a 15-minute slot when we need say a longer appointment, which will mean either we change things around or we reschedule. The other thing that's vital in those huddles is that admin are involved. Your multidisciplinary team are involved, because admin will then know where the nurses are sitting, because if you're anything like most general practices, those rooms can be changing on a daily basis, and it saves time, because there's nothing worse for admin not knowing which nurse is in which room and spending wasting their time looking for us to communicate with. They know which phone numbers in each room, they know which GPs in each room, and that's the other thing that is really important for admin to be involved and to know what's going on, because we are a team and everybody is such a vital role within that team. The other thing that we can see in these in this time is that, let me just go back.
Shall I make a couple of comments about huddles while you track your notes, Carol? Yeah, so some of what Carol is giving, obviously nice real life examples. The huddle is an obvious lean standard. So it's got a standard time, it follows a standard agenda, it has a standard purpose. The aim is to plan that day. And what Carol was starting to talk about was really, you get a chance as a team to look at your access channels. So you know, inbox, acute care, routine templates, as well as respond to workforce changes on the day. And in the last 2-3 years, those have been quite significant. I spoke to general practice in Te Tai Tokerau quite recently, and they've still got like 2 people sick or 3 people sick. So being able to assess that on the day, look of where all your demand levels are, and make some decisions in the morning, and even things like which nurse is the go-to nurse today. Those sort of detailed processes came out of improvement when we were working in general practice, Carol and I together, during COVID, because we saw an increase in actual emergency cases coming to general practice's door, things we wouldn't have had before. And admin needed to be able to get to a go-to person very quickly. So again, the huddle kind of becomes a built-in standardized place where all that sort of anticipation occurs. But it's important that it stays to time and stays to agenda. And one of the things we used to say to all and agree, it was an expectation setting and an agreement, was that the huddle is focused on today and what's happening today, and anticipating today and working together and making some changes if we need to anticipate need. But it is not a place for complex care discussion. It's not a multidisciplinary team meeting. We have those separately. And this is also not a problem-solving time. If we come up with a problem in the huddle, we would note it, and we have a separate problem-solving time. And the reason why we're so clear on that is huddles suddenly become, 45 minutes, and you definitely can't afford for your whole clinical team to be hanging out for 45 minutes in the morning. So it needs to be short and sharp. Go on,
Yes.
Carol.
Okay. So opening the templates and looking at the triage I mentioned. So yes, ideally those have already been looked at. This is particularly important when you've got new staff and locums, because the nurses or the people that have been here for some time know these patients, and ideally you could start off with your all group huddle and then break off into smaller teams where you look at the templates and go through the day. It's an opportunity to ask questions which you can't get often during the day. A GP and a nurse can have a quick catch up, very quick, because we haven't got all that time regarding a certain patient, because otherwise you can find yourself waiting outside GP rooms, which is a waste of everybody's time, and trying to get in between appointments. So it's a really good way to ground your day. The other thing it can do is that we can look at the templates and see, because the patients now have opportunities to book remote on, through the portals, one nurse can have an overwhelming amount of work on her template, and it's an opportunity to share that out, everybody's no one's going to get overwhelmed. And if they are, and it's unavoidable to change that, at least we all know and we can support that particular staff member. So that's where I said you can break away and have that time with your smaller teams. So we're talking 15 minutes get together, all that can be done, and then perhaps another 15 minutes where you break away into those smaller huddles. And like Mel was saying, it is not a time for process or problem solving. And if these occur during the huddle, it's a good time to write them on the whiteboard and just let the team know that we haven't not heard them, but these will go into our problem solving groups and our change improvement groups, so that people are feeling heard and needing to see those come into being. Was there anything else you wanted to add regarding the daily huddle, Mel?
Maybe the last point I would make is it's a kind of a good example of a very different culture in the practice, from just coming into practice, going into your room, shutting the door and getting on with your day. Which is kind of a real old-fashioned, and sometimes especially new GPs and younger GPs find themselves in that position. It's not a very nice position to be in. Being able to come into a practice where there is a standard set for starters, this is your day, this is your week, this is your month, this is how we work. And built into that standard is time to get together as multidisciplinary teams. Some of that time is about planning the day. Some of that time is about talking about more complex cases. Some of that time is to look at improvement. So setting all of that up. So it sets a tone. You've kind of used those words, where we anticipate working together. And the other thing that, just as an example, at Dr. Tikipunga, where we were lucky enough to have a social worker who was mental health credentialed, mental health access on the day would be triaged by that person. So again, kind of looking at appointments booked for nurses, appointments booked for GPs, triage, inbox, who's in, who's out. Oh, have we had 4 quite complex discharges this morning? Pharmacist, social worker. So there is, it's a kind of demand, and and you also mentioned lead nurse. Who does that work? Because that's more than you would do with everybody sitting in the same room. Somebody's actually probably looking at that stuff at 7:30 is the truth of it. Having a quick, or if you've got people designated, we had a pharmacist who looked at complex discharges twice a week. That was her job. So you knew. And I think that one of the things that can drive overburden in general practice or burnout is knowing that access channels are not being covered. So if you're a GP or a nurse or a HIPAA social, you know, and you're going home thinking there's still 10 things in the inbox and I don't know what they are. So that kind of anticipating, I think that's all part of it, which is why when you say to healthcare home practices, often they will say the thing that's really great is the huddle. Sounds simple, but it's actually got so much to it.
There was just one other thing I was wanting to share, is it's an opportunity to get that really important information out. And so somebody like the nurse lead or somebody else can decipher all the emails that are coming through, because, you know, sometimes I would get to work and there would be 20 emails. So the GP isn't going to have time to go in and read every single email. And so it's an opportunity to get those bite-sized, like really important information out to the team. For example, it could be as simple as, hey guys, the flu vaccines have arrived. We are up and ready to go. And today we are going to be vaccinating. So please offer that to every client that comes through. Also, those criteria change regularly. Who's eligible? You know, it was different than last year. So just reminding them really quickly, these are the ones that are eligible for the free vaccinations. So please make sure they are done. And so everybody is like, okay, flu vaccines. So everybody that comes into the practice is then talked to about flu vaccinations. So that is when the huddle is so important.
I guess I'm just going to respond to Lovey's little point, Carol, because I think Lovey made an interesting point about time being allocated in, say, a GP or nurse's template to look at inboxes, and that's right. But what we also know is that we probably don't have enough time for demand generally. There's always more. And if you look at it from a lean point of view, just like pure bottlenecks versus flow, obviously you might have 10 things come into one person's and 100 into the others. So having a 360 viewed look and having processes that you know are built in to do that, having more than just a GP opening up an inbox for sure, you know, having remote GPs who clean up at night, we had all of that stuff. So there's we're getting off the huddle, but I guess what we're saying is a team view anticipating the day, because the huddle is very much the day. And then you would take the same philosophy for the week, for the month, for the year, you know, at all your demand channels. I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll reshare slides. The huddle is also a place where you can make real quick changes. So, you know, in terms of being agile, and when we saw that in COVID, changing protocols, changing doors, being able to, and that in some ways means that there's one place where everybody's going to get information. And particularly during COVID, when people were anxious, including our workforce, and there was a fast changeable environment, it is good to know that it's a bit like a briefing on a ship. At 9 o'clock in the morning, there will be a briefing. We will give you the weather forecast for the day. And it's reliable. Anybody who ever listened to the BBC, you know, it's on the time and you can, and it's always the same. And that's actually also helpful when everything else is changing. So that, you know, that's perhaps a good last thing to say about the huddle is if you have a built-in time that follows the same agenda that is there to do a job, and there are other examples of that, so, you know, improvement time would be another one, then that is a kind of rhythm that you can rely on even when everything else is going crazy.
Okay, just moving on because I'm very aware of the time. We've got 10 minutes left, so so if we can just
find where we are.
Okay, so while we're doing that, I was just briefly touched on micro teams in general practice. So these are smaller teams that consist of maybe a couple of GPs. In our practice, we had 3 GPs, 3 nurses on each team. We had a practice care assistant. And so because of the change in workflow, it meant that we had some continuity of care. And so it was great for our clients because they were regularly seeing the same nurses and they were regularly seeing the same doctors. It meant that we could also keep an eye on our proactive care within that small team. And you develop this trust on a professional level as well. When you're in that same flow, you get to know how each other works. And so that is another really cool thing to add into to keep that continuity of care that often nurses are the stable and the stable workforce, and so it did work, and it was really successful, and we were able to back each other in our care. There we go. So the role of nursing leadership.
Okay. Sorry, Carol, I'm on the last slide. Are you still here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so we talked about the micro teams. Really important. We had weekly meetings, which was essential for proactive care, because it can seem a little bit overwhelming. And within that proactive care teams, we develop champion roles, because when people are passionate about what they do, they work really well. And mostly that would be a nurse who would hold that lead, like an equity champion or a diabetic care champion. And in that, they would have a team. They would have the hip and health coaches. They would have their practice care assistants. But when we'd come together in that weekly meeting, and maybe Mel will go more into detail on this with Kanban next week, but we definitely used a Kanban because it was very measurable. We could see where we were at, we could see where our targets were at, and we could see, so it was measurable. And it also, it was really good for our team, because we could see that we had met some of these needs. And if you are doing it on a weekly basis with your nursing team, just 1 hour a week, you're not getting to the end of 3 to 6 months going, oh my gosh, we're so far behind. We haven't done any of our annual diabetic reviews. We've got CVDs coming through. And so it's not crisis management, it's chipping away, and it's getting the job done and getting the best care for those patients who need to be seen. Did you want to add into that, Mel?
No, given that time, what I'm going to do is move us past the lean waste slide, because we'll cover that next week.
Yeah.
Because I think you've got 3 more slides. It's not 38, just to reassure everybody. Our ending is much earlier than that.
I would really,
but I'll let you talk about change.
I would
Carol.
really like to talk about this. This is such an important thing to do. When we get those process and problems coming through, what is really important to what good looks like, to be able to come to a place where what good looks like. And so we recommend to develop a change team, and it just really needs to involve 1 nurse, 1 GP, and someone from admin. And those are the people, like, we just put it out there and said, is anybody interested? And so we got this team, and we only met monthly, and that was scheduled into our team, into our templates. And so we were able to identify some issues that were coming up. One particular issue that came up was we would have people who weren't showing up to appointments for their annual diabetic checks and for, say their annual cervical screening checks. And so they were deemed as non-responders, which I think is really a very poor term that we use in general practice, because often it's a lack of access on our behalf, and that we haven't created that space to come. And some of the people that we looked at were business owners, and they had their own say they were a builder, and they had their own business, and they were too busy, and they couldn't actually afford to take a day off to come in and have an annual diabetic check. And so that was one example. Others would be non-responders as far as cervical screening. And again, you know, am I going to take a day off work when I'm when I'm providing for my family, etc., to come in and have a smear? I'm not unwell. I can't prioritize that into my week. So we identified the problem. And so we decided as a team that we would, our plan was to have an evening clinic. And so on a Monday evening, we we were open till 7, and those non-responders turned up, and we were able to have a healthcare, our practice care assistant there who was doing our annual diabetic reviews. Her template was full. Our GP template, he was completely full. The nurse template was also completely full, doing mostly cervical screening, and we were able to target those people that couldn't access the service, not non-responders. And that was being able to execute it. And of course, admin had to be involved in that. But interestingly enough, those who put their hands up to be in the change improvement team were the ones that initiated, sustained the change. And eventually other people come on board and are okay. But it's usually those people that are motivated to see improvement are the ones that actually execute it. So that was great, and that is going back to what does good look like, and it's small things like this that we can change and see that what good looks like. Yep. Mel, you've brought up.
I've chucked up, and we've got 2 minutes left, so we're in perfect shape. This is just, again, next week we talk a little bit more about lean and improvement, but a change team would typically do, as Carol was saying, you know, identify, and we'll also look next week at using data as well as talking to our communities where the improvement opportunities lie, and then initiate some improvement as a start point. It's starting it. And the classic plan, do, study, act, cycle picture here is you start and then learn something and then do it again. And I think an important point to make is sometimes you can start small. So it's also related to change. If we say, oh, we'll open up an evening clinic to the entire workforce, they would probably not respond well. But if there are 5 people who go, I'll do it, and I'm keen to do it, and I know exactly which patient I'm going to offer this appointment to because our workforce did know exactly which patient, then they start that work. And when they start it, they create something good and demonstrate it and show it, and it's got a feel-good factor for everyone. Anyway, I'm going to move on to the last slide, and just before our karakia, because I see it is coming up to 10:45. Carol,
Yes.
go ahead.
These are some points I'd really like you to take away. I think what are we doing well? It's really important to celebrate what we're doing right, to celebrate our successes. You'll all be doing something incredibly well. And I think that we can always, you know, we can be focused on what we're not doing as well as we'd like to be doing. Really important to every day go, hey, this is going right. We're doing this great. Well done, team. To really look at, perhaps if you're not doing huddles, to reintroduce those huddles, because I think they are very, very helpful. Protected time is so important for proactive care for for everybody, actually, our doctors for their inboxes, our nurses for a proactive care, for recalls. That has to be scheduled into our week. Weekly meetings, well, like we've said with our nurses, for proactive care and the use of something like Kanban, and having an improvement team. We also ended up having a general practice meeting that I think that was every bi-monthly, but our GPs then decided they wanted to have a monthly meeting, a peer group meeting too. So these are all things to look at, but just those little snippets to take away. And I really hope that that's been helpful. If you do have any questions, I'm sure we could do a couple of minutes. Is that all right, Mel?
It's 10:46, so maybe, unless anybody's got anything burning, you are very welcome to, of course, communicate with us after this by email. And thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to take us to the final slide. Ko ranganui e tū nei, ko papatuanaku e tā koto nei, kia tau te rangi mari e, ke runga I tō tātou mahi tahi, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. Ngā mihi, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining us. We have 2 more Wānanga to come. Next week will be about improvement and preventative care and using data, and have a fabulous rest of the day. Ka kite.
Ka kite.
Hei kona.